It was the 4th year of being entangled with Patrick when my family went bankrupt. Taking the opportunity, his unforgettable first love said, "It's about time she suffers and learns to tone down her spoiled attitude." Upon hearing that, Patrick abandoned me in a foreign country. 4 months later, I returned to the capital, battered and bruised. Everyone thought I would still cling to Patrick. Instead, I actively avoided him and returned his gifts. I cut ties with him completely. Patrick laughed with his friends. Finally, I got rid of that clingy parasite. But on the day I left the capital, he chased me to the airport. Utterly distraught and trembling, he pleaded, "Nicole, please stay. Can we go back to the way things were?" I smiled, eyes curved, and pointed to my slightly swollen belly. "Patrick, look at me. How could we ever go back?" Chapter 1. The day I returned to the capital, still covered in wounds, Patrick's assistant came to pick me up from the airport. When I arrived, the atmosphere in the private room was lively. As I approached, I heard Patrick's voice. "Nicole seems to have made some progress. She's finally being a bit more obedient. She's always been spoiled. It's about time she learned some hardship." Roma was right. Now that Nicole's family is bankrupt, she's no longer a pampered princess. If she keeps acting like before, who's going to tolerate her? It's just a pity for Patrick. She'll probably cling to you even more now. Patrick let out a mocking laugh. "You think I don't know? She's just like a leech." As his words fell, he looked up to see me walking in. The room that had been filled with laughter and banter suddenly fell silent. In their eyes, I saw shock, surprise, and disbelief. The once radiant, haughty young lady from 4 months ago now stood gaunt and weary, like a refugee who had just escaped from hell. Always poised and graceful, Roma was the first to speak with concern. "Nicole, what happened to you? Come in." But I didn't move. Unlike before, I no longer reacted the moment I saw Roma sitting next to Patrick. No longer letting displeasure show on my face. No longer letting Roma's words anger me into tears, sparking a fight with Patrick. Those gatherings always ended in disaster. So much so that many people disliked me. Thinking about it now, it felt ridiculous. "Why are you standing there? Get in." Patrick frowned at me, his expression one of familiar disgust and impatience. Chapter 2. I lowered my gaze and smiled faintly. "Patrick, thank you for sending your assistant to pick me up from the airport." "Nicole? I came today to return this to you." I took a small box from my coat pocket and handed it to him. It was an ordinary luxury brand necklace. It was also the only birthday gift Patrick had given me over the years. I cherished it deeply and only wore it on my birthday. But now, I didn't want it anymore. Patrick didn't take it. He sat there with a cold face, his lips pressed tightly together. I hesitated for a moment and placed the box on the table next to me. "Nicole, your hand." The girl closest to me gasped softly. Patrick's gaze immediately fell on my hand. My hand was covered with cracks, scars all over the back, and the once delicate fingertips were now blistered. The blisters had turned into hard scabs, twisted, deformed, and unsightly. I pulled my hand back into my sleeve and looked up at Patrick again. "Patrick, there's one last thing I came here for today." "What is it?" His voice was so cold it sent chills down my spine. "I must have bothered you all these years, right?" I smiled apologetically at him. "In the past, I was immature and too headstrong. I'm sorry. From now on, it won't happen again." After I finished speaking, I didn't linger and turned to leave. As I walked out of the room, Patrick called after me, "Nicole, you better keep your word. Don't be full of lies and end up contradicting yourself." My steps paused for a moment, but I didn't look back. All right. Chapter 3. The night things went wrong at home, I was still abroad. The one who loved me the most, my father, couldn't be saved. Not long after, my mother liquidated all her assets. She went straight to the US to live with my uncle. The only thing she left me was the small apartment. I didn't resent her for abandoning me. In fact, I was grateful she didn't leave me homeless. This bed is small, but compared to cramming into a basement with 7 or 8 people abroad, it's heaven. I had the best, most peaceful sleep in these 4 months, until the doorbell woke me up. I was surprised to see Patrick through the peephole, but then I remembered. He also owned a place here. I opened the door and spoke before he could say a word. Sorry. I'll move out soon. I'm planning to put the apartment on the market. Nicole, what are you talking about? I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but after I said that, Patrick's expression turned much darker. I'll move out today. I promise you'll never see me again. After I finished speaking, I grabbed my phone to contact the real estate agent. Just as I dialed the number, Patrick suddenly snatched the phone from me and smashed it to the ground. You've been playing this game of cat and mouse for 4 years now. Aren't you tired of it? Sell the apartment and move out? Then what? End up wandering the streets at night, crying and begging me for help? Finally, you'll move in with me, right? Nicole, can't you just grow up and stop playing these childish tricks? I looked at the shattered pieces of my phone on the floor and felt a wave of heartache. 4 months. Even filling my stomach had been a luxury. That phone was a second-hand gift from my boss's wife when I returned to the country out of pity. I knelt down and tried to pick up the broken pieces. Patrick threw his wallet at me. Go buy yourself a new one. I'll compensate you, so you don't have any more excuses to cling to me. With that, he slammed the door and left. I looked at the wallet on the ground. I laughed. And as I laughed, tears began to fall. In the end, I still bought the cheapest phone I could find. He was right. It's best if we owe each other nothing. I called his assistant to come and pick up Patrick's wallet. Miss Bai, I'm terribly sorry, but I can't leave right now. Could you perhaps bring the wallet to the office? I thought for a moment. All right. I'll take it over shortly. Chapter 4. The assistant hung up the phone and looked at Patrick, who was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. Although he didn't fully understand why Patrick instructed him to say that, he could sense something. It seemed that Mr. Zhao didn't hate Miss Bai as much as he claimed. Did you get the medicine? Yes, I did. It's all here. The assistant quickly handed over the paper bag. They were all ointments and scar creams, obviously prepared for Miss Bai. Patrick nodded. You can go now. About 40 minutes later, the reception desk called the secretary's office. The assistant knocked and entered, speaking cautiously. Mr. Zhao. Miss Bai sent a package through local courier. Before he could finish, the jade paperweight on the desk was suddenly slammed onto the floor with a loud crash. The assistant kept his head down, not daring to breathe. A moment later, Patrick laughed. Well, after months apart, she's really gotten bolder. Chapter 5. After listing the house with the real estate agency, I temporarily found a cheap hotel to stay in. Patrick hadn't contacted me again, but strangely, he started showing up everywhere with Roma, making their relationship very public. Every now and then, someone would call me. Nicole, are you and Patrick having a fight? Is Roma marrying Patrick? I heard they went ring shopping yesterday. I didn't respond to any of it. I just stared at my slightly protruding belly in the mirror. Then, I called the agent again to lower the asking price by 50,000 yuan. I wanted to leave Beijing as soon as possible. I wanted to leave forever and never come back. The child in my belly was an accident within an accident. By the time I realized, he was already 3 months along. The doctor said the fetus had already formed, developing well, with tiny hands and feet. As I lay there, tears suddenly welled up. But after thinking it over, I decided to terminate the pregnancy. Maybe it was fate, but just as I was about to undergo the procedure, chaos erupted nearby. There were explosions in the distance, and soon the hospital lost power. And just like that, the child remained. I comforted myself. At least his father was a handsome Eastern man. Patrick had abandoned me in that war-torn, remote foreign country. For a young, pretty, single woman, the disasters that could follow were obvious. Would I be sold into the red light district, forced into the lowest ranks of prostitution, eventually dying of disease? Or would I leave with a man? When I cried out for help in Chinese, I had already accepted the next step fate had planned, and when he extended his hand to me, the trajectory of my destiny shifted entirely. The father of the baby in my belly, he was that man, a rich, strikingly handsome Eastern man, whose conscience had not yet been completely lost. It was better than if Patrick had been the father. In a way, wasn't this fate's small mercy toward me? Chapter 6. The day the house sold. I received a call from Roma. Nicole, I've decided to accept Patrick's proposal. Congratulations. I hope you can come to the engagement party. Can you? I'm sorry. Are you still not over it, Nicole? Roma sounded as if she pitied me, her voice soft. Some things just aren't meant to be, but I'll admit you're smarter than before, knowing how to take a step back. But it won't work, Nicole. Patrick only listens to me, and his heart has always been mine. See? Just one word from me, and he dropped you. Roma, what are you trying to say? There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Nicole, I've decided to come back. So I want to make it clear, stop clinging to Patrick. Am I clinging? Don't think I don't know what you're plotting. You love him too much to let go, especially now that your family's gone bankrupt. If his heart is only for you, and he listens only to you, then what are you afraid of? Roma didn't say anything for a long time, so I hung up. A few seconds later, I received a voice message. Patrick's voice, lazy and dismissive, finally shook off that clingy leash. Never felt this free in my life. Congratulations on your newfound freedom. Haha. I smiled and turned off my phone. Chapter 7. The day I left Beijing was a gloomy one, with heavy smog filling the air. I stepped out of the taxi, dragging my suitcase as I walked into the airport terminal. Suddenly, I heard the roar of an engine in the distance. Instinctively, I turned around. It was that familiar car, speeding toward me. I tightened my grip on the suitcase handle and started walking forward quickly. Nicole! Patrick jumped out of the car and caught up with me within a few strides. Nicole. He gripped my arm tightly, his voice trembling at the end. Where are you going? I looked at him calmly. Patrick, let go. His eyes were red and swollen, and he looked utterly lost. Nicole, stay. Can we go back to the way things were? I released my grip on the suitcase handle, taking a step back. I slowly unbuttoned my coat. The winter wind in Beijing was bone-chilling, and within seconds, my whole body was freezing. Though my waist was still slender, there was a slight swell in my abdomen. Patrick's gaze traveled down inch by inch, finally freezing in place. I smiled at him, eyes curved. Patrick, look at me. How can we go back to the way things were? Chapter 8. The howling wind seemed to pause suddenly. Patrick just stood there, motionless, for what felt like a long time. Finally, he lifted his bloodshot eyes and looked at me. Nicole, why did it come to this? I pulled my coat tighter around me and casually brushed back my wind-blown hair. You're asking me? I smiled calmly. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? No, Nicole, it wasn't like that. I left you there, but Roma said she had a relative over there, and she had already arranged for them to pick you up. She said you were too spoiled, too unaware of real hardships. How would you ever find a husband with that kind of attitude? I was just so fed up with you at the time, so I agreed without thinking. But I didn't mean to hurt you. I just wanted you to suffer a little so that when you returned, you wouldn't cling to me anymore. Nicole, didn't Roma's relative pick you up? The smile on my face gradually faded in the cold wind. He did. Patrick let out a sigh of relief. I knew it. Roma is always thorough and considerate. But do you know what her relative does for a living? Patrick froze. Nicole? He's involved in organized crime, smuggling, and all kinds of illegal activities. I looked at Patrick coldly, my empty eyes reflecting his stunned, pathetic expression. I almost died trying to escape from him. My documents, phone, wallet, all gone. I was so hungry I had to fight with beggars for food, sleeping under bridges, narrowly escaping assault several times. In the end, I was targeted again and almost sold into a red light district. I had cried all my tears during those 4 months, but maybe the wind was too harsh and too cold now, because my eyes stung unbearably. The only person who reached out to help me was him, the biological father of the child inside me. Stop, Nicole, stop. Patrick's face twisted in agony. He stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. I'll take you to the hospital. Nicole, this child, whose origin we don't even know, can't be kept. Why not? He couldn't meet my eyes. his voice low and hoarse. If you get rid of the child, we'll pretend none of this ever happened. Nicole, I'll treat you well. Your mother's gone to America. You don't have any other family left here. Stay with me. I'll take care of you, Patrick. I forcefully pulled my hand from his grip. Nicole, don't be foolish. No one else knows about your pregnancy. I'll arrange a private hospital for you to get rid of the baby. I'll keep it a secret, and your reputation won't be affected. And then? I asked deliberately, will you marry me? Chapter 9. Patrick was visibly stunned. He lowered his gaze, his lips tightly pressed, as if he had struggled for a long time before making a decision. Nicole, with your family's situation now, the elders would never agree. But don't worry, I won't abandon you. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. Patrick. I softly called his name, and in the moment he looked up at me, I gave him a faint smile. Do you know what I'm most grateful for right now? What is it? I'm grateful that I never had any relationship with you. I'm grateful that the child I'm carrying isn't yours. Nicole. The panic in Patrick's eyes was unmistakable. I took 2 steps back. Don't come looking for me again. Don't make me regret ever liking someone like you. I grabbed my suitcase and turned to leave, but Patrick chased after me again. Nicole, where can you go now? You've never had to lift a finger your whole life. How will you survive after leaving Beijing and leaving me? I abruptly turned around and let go of my suitcase. I held out my scarred hands in front of Patrick. With these hands, Nicole won't starve. Chapter 10. Patrick's eyes were blank, and he was trembling all over. I had never seen him like this before. In our circle, he was always the wildest, the most carefree. No matter where he went, he was the most arrogant, untamed young master. When I was young and foolish, I prayed countless times. I prayed that Patrick would like me, treat me a little better. I prayed that Roma would stay away from Patrick and stop coming back to mess up our relationship. I prayed that I could marry Patrick. If one day he smiled at me, just treated me a little nicer, I would forget all the grievances and tears, and continue to orbit around him, tirelessly, endlessly. But now, he couldn't let me go. He was begging me not to leave. For the first time, I could finally see myself in his eyes, but all I felt was absurdity, revulsion, and disgust. Nicole. Patrick reached out to hold my hand, but just as he was about to touch me, he stopped. His hands were the hands of a pampered young master. Once, mine were the same, but now, my knuckles were twisted, my hands covered in scars. The blisters hardened into ugly calluses. They weren't beautiful anymore, but they were stronger, the flowers that once grew in a greenhouse. After leaving, don't always wither and die. Chapter 11. As I dragged my suitcase into the airport terminal, I suddenly felt a discomfort in my lower abdomen. Perhaps it was the intense emotions from the argument earlier, or maybe my body had been pushed too hard these days, and it simply couldn't take it anymore. When I felt a warm, wet flow, the world around me started to spin. Suddenly, my body collapsed softly to the ground. In my last moments of consciousness, I heard many voices calling my name. They blurred together into a chaotic hum, but soon, all the sounds disappeared, leaving only a deathly stillness, like silent waters. When I opened my eyes again, I was greeted by a blinding white. The smell of disinfectant filled my nose. The sound of beeping machines echoed at my side. Instinctively, I tried to raise my hand to touch my abdomen, but a soft hand gently stopped me. Miss Bai, don't worry. The baby is fine. Who are you? I stared blankly at the middle-aged woman in front of me. Her appearance was plain, but her eyes were kind. Her clothing style was a bit odd, and her Mandarin was clumsy. I felt like I had seen her somewhere before, but I couldn't remember where. Mr. Fu already knows. He's on a plane heading to the mainland. She tucked the blanket around me and asked softly, "Would you like some water?" I nodded, and it took a while for my foggy mind to clear up. Mr. Fu, could it be him? But back then, we had agreed to never meet again, to sever all ties. That's right. Now that I was pregnant, I had broken the rules. I didn't know much about this Mr. Fu's background, but just from his attire and lifestyle, I could tell. His background and upbringing were definitely far beyond ordinary. That morning, after it was all over, as he dressed to leave, he had asked me, rather indifferently, if I wanted to follow him from then on. Given my circumstances at the time, following him would have been the best way out, but I refused. I didn't want to become another despised parasite. He wasn't offended by my rejection, though. He even left me a sum of money, but I didn't take it. He saved my life. I spent the night with him, and that was enough to call it even. In the 3 months that followed, I never saw him again, but I suffered a great deal during my wandering days. Little by little, I learned how to make a living, how to stretch every penny. I also learned how to read people, no longer acting spoiled and thoughtless. In my hardest, most exhausting moments, I cried and regretted it. When I was so tired that I couldn't even stand, I even thought about going back to find Oliver. But in the end, I gritted my teeth and pushed through. Relying on a man once means being beneath him for life. My family had gone bankrupt, and I was no longer a rich young lady. If I returned with my spoiled princess attitude, I'd be dependent on others for the rest of my life. But I no longer wanted to live like that. Chapter 12. After drinking some water and eating, I drifted back to sleep. It was a restless sleep, and in the end, I even dreamt of Mr. Fu. He was sitting leisurely on the sofa in the living room, using a blowtorch to light a cigar. A servant led me in, and I stood there for a while. Only then did he lift his head and glance at me. Nicole. Mr. Fu. He had a pair of cold, indifferent eyes. When he looked at people, it always seemed like there was an impenetrable fog between him and the world. Though he was right in front of me, it felt as if he were 1,000 miles away. In the dream, after calling my name, he said nothing more, not until the cigar was finished. My back was drenched in sweat. In the dream, my belly had grown larger, but my body was still frail, and I could barely stand after a while. Just as I was about to collapse, he finally spoke. Who gave you the audacity to secretly carry my Oliver's child? Mr. Fu. I didn't. I took all the medicine you gave me. You can check the surveillance if you don't believe me. I hurried to defend myself, but he didn't seem to believe a word I said. He just waved his hand lazily, signaling the bodyguards to drag me out. Mr. Fu. Mr. Fu. Please don't. I cried out loudly, begging him, and that's how I woke up crying from the dream. When I opened my eyes in a daze, I was still muttering, Mr. Fu. What kind of nightmare was that? Crying like a child. Through my blurred vision, I saw the handsome face of a man, but his eyes were amber. His Mandarin wasn't very fluent, but his voice was deep and pleasant. He was wearing a custom-made black suit with peak lapels. Sitting by my bedside, he was holding a handkerchief, wiping away the tears I had shed in my sleep. The scene was strange, yet oddly harmonious. I stared at him blankly, forgetting to cry. Mr. Fu. Chapter 13. It's me. He placed the damp handkerchief aside and replied in a gentle tone. I snapped out of it, hastily trying to sit up, but Oliver raised his hand to press me back down. Lie still, ignoring everything else. I hurried to explain. Mr. Fu. I took all the medicine you left that day. You can ask the servants in the house, or check the surveillance. I don't know how I could still be pregnant. When I first found out, I went to the hospital immediately, but there was a bombing. The entire hospital lost power, and the procedure couldn't be completed. I knew, for a man of Oliver's stature and influence, even a single lie would be fatal. You can arrange for the surgery right now. If you're worried, you can wait until the surgery is over yourself. Nicole. He suddenly interrupted me, just like in the dream. With that calm yet deep voice, he called my name, but unlike the tired impatience in the dream, his tone now was warm. I'm a Buddhist. I don't take lives. As he said this, his gaze fell on my face once more. Those indifferent, cold eyes now carried a faint trace of warmth, softened by his gentle voice. Besides, he is my flesh and blood. He leaned forward slightly, his long fingers brushing aside the damp hair from my forehead. Rest well. Don't overthink things, Mr. Fu. His hand moved away, and he stood up, looking down at me. His eyes, as always, were devoid of emotion, neither joy nor sorrow, just an endless calm. Unless, of course, you truly don't want him. Chapter 14. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, Oliver asked me the same question for the second time. Nicole, will you come with me? But this time, I didn't answer as quickly as I had the last time. He wore a sleek, black coat, with bodyguards and an assistant following behind him. Although he appeared calm and gentle, his words always measured and steady. There was something about him that invoked fear. I was no longer the naive, simple-minded Nicole I once was. If I went with him, I could foresee a life of luxury and comfort, free from worries for the rest of my days. But I could also foresee a life like a caged bird, a puppet on strings. Yet, when he looked at me like that, those calm, gentle eyes made me harbor a foolish hope I shouldn't have. As if his question carried just a sliver of sincerity, it took a long time for the words of refusal to finally come out. Mr. Fu, I am very grateful to you, but I'm really sorry, I cannot go with you. As soon as I said that, it felt like the air around me suddenly became still. The people behind him, all standing there in a solemn line, held their breath, eyes downcast. Even their breathing was inaudible. I, too, couldn't help but grow nervous, my palms gradually becoming clammy with sweat. All right. Oliver's voice shattered the unbearable silence. His expression didn't change. It remained as calm and unreadable as ever. It must have been hard for you. I quickly shook my head. Not at all. Please don't worry about me. Oliver nodded slightly. Do you have enough money? I do. If you run into any difficulties, remember to come to me. Yes, Nicole. I'm not just saying this. I hurried to respond. Mr. Fu, I won't do anything foolish. I promise. Good. Oliver gave me one last glance before turning and getting into the car. I watched as the car drove away, until it disappeared from view. Only then did I gently place a hand on my abdomen and let out a long breath. Chapter 15. The car had been driving away from the hospital for a long time. Oliver, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. Martin, do I seem terrifying? Mr. Fu, there's no one in this world more gentle than you. Why would you ask that? She seems very afraid of me. Martin was momentarily stunned and tried to explain. Miss Bai just doesn't know you well yet. After all, you two haven't spent much time together. But Oliver seemed not to hear Martin's response. He stared out the window, his long fingers playing with the sandalwood beads on his wrist. As if talking to himself, he muttered, even with the child, she still won't come with me. Martin fell silent, unsure of how to respond. That day when Miss Bai cried for help, he had thought Mr. Fu had acted out of momentary kindness. Even when he brought her home, Martin didn't think much of it. Mr. Fu had lived alone for so many years, not to mention that the Fu family's matriarch was almost frantic with worry. Even those of them close to him felt a pang of sympathy. But who would have thought the young lady would rather go out and suffer than stay? Martin himself had come from hardship, but watching Miss Bai struggle and fight her way through the slums, seeing her work herself to the bone, blistering her hands just to put food on the table, Martin couldn't help but be moved. Miss Bai had been born into luxury, likely never even washed a dish in her life. But here she was, enduring such hardship and toil. How could anyone not admire that? Perhaps it was precisely her resilience and stubbornness that made Mr. Fu care even more. He secretly protected her all the way and assigned his most trusted people to follow her back to the mainland. When the news came that Miss Bai had almost suffered a miscarriage, Mr. Fu left the negotiation table immediately. Everyone had seen the rush and worry in his actions. Even Martin thought there would soon be a new mistress in the Fu household. But still, Miss Bai refused to come back. Martin wanted to offer some comfort, but he was at a loss for words. Watching his silent employer, Martin felt a pang in his own heart. Sir, if it comes to it, should I bring Miss Bai here by force? Oliver looked up at Martin. Martin, no one is to touch her. But sir, Martin was so anxious he almost forgot his place. If she's happy this way, then let her be. But sir, don't say any more. Oliver closed his eyes. And Martin, reluctant but resigned, fell silent. Chapter 16. As I was leaving the hospital, I suddenly received a call from Daniel. There were plenty of people in our circle who didn't like me, but Daniel had always treated me decently. He was a few years older than me and had looked out for me from time to time, even though Patrick and I had completely fallen out. I still addressed Daniel as I used to. Brother Danny, what's going on? Nicole, can you come over for a moment? I paused for a moment. Brother Danny, if there's something, just say it over the phone. Patrick and Roma had a fight, and he hit her. I was a bit surprised. After all these years, Roma had always been like a goddess to Patrick. Now, he was even planning to marry her. Why would he suddenly lay hands on her? Roma's crying and threatening to jump off a building, and Patrick can't stop her. Brother Danny, what could I possibly do? Patrick is forcing Roma to apologize to you in person. I couldn't help but laugh. That's really not necessary. Roma was at fault for stirring the pot. But who was the real culprit? And besides, if I hadn't clung to him for 4 years, driving everyone mad, there wouldn't have been such a mess in the first place. Nicole, Patrick does care about you. Brother Danny, please stop. Hearing those words now, they felt so absurd it made me sick. If there's nothing else, I'm going to hang up. Nicole. I hung up, feeling utterly drained. I had wanted to leave that very night, but my body simply couldn't take it. The doctor had also said I needed weekly hospital visits to protect the pregnancy. After thinking it over, I decided to book a cheap hotel near the hospital. Just as I made the booking, Daniel sent me a WeChat message. Nicole, Patrick's hurt, pretty badly. In the photo, Patrick sat slumped on the sofa, clutching his forehead. Blood was pouring from between his fingers, covering half his face. In the past, I would have cried from heartbreak. I would have rushed to his side without hesitation. But now, I calmly replied with a message. Take him to the hospital. It does look serious. Nicole, Patrick won't go. I didn't respond. A moment later, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I had a hunch who it might be, so I didn't answer. After that, my phone went quiet. Chapter 17. After returning to the hotel, I washed up quickly and lay down. The next morning, I didn't wake up until 9 o'clock. There were a few messages on my phone. They were from Roma, sent at 2 in the morning. Nicole, are you satisfied now? Patrick won't marry me, and it's all because of you. I'll make sure to return the slap personally. I couldn't help but think she was seriously delusional. If we were really counting slaps, how many would she owe me? I simply blocked all the numbers, even Daniel's. But when I went for another checkup at the hospital, I ran into Patrick again. He must have been waiting for me there on purpose. When we crossed paths, I didn't avoid him. I nodded at him and headed toward the elevator. Patrick had bandages wrapped around his head, looking quite disheveled. He didn't say a word, just silently followed behind me. Registration, examination, medication. I was feeling tired, so I sat down on a bench to rest. Patrick glanced at me several times, as if wanting to speak but hesitating. After a while, he finally called out my name. Nicole, that man doesn't want you to, does he? This is between me and him. Patrick stared at me, as if making a huge decision. Nicole, come with me. I'll help you raise the child. Chapter 18. I hadn't intended to waste even a single word on him, but hearing him say that, I couldn't help but laugh out of sheer anger. I raised my eyes to him. Patrick, what do you mean by that? I saw everything that day. Nicole, I saw them put you in the car and take you to the hospital. I couldn't even get close. Brother Danny said that man, the one with the last name Fu, has a background that's too deep to fathom. He's not a good person, and you can't afford to mess with him. And now it seems I wasn't wrong. He doesn't want you, and he doesn't want the child either. But Nicole, we've known each other since we were kids. I can't bear to watch you fall into such a state. I'll give you an apartment, transfer it to your name, and from now on, I'll cover all your and the child's expenses. Patrick, I know you. You wouldn't be so kind without a reason. Just tell me, what's your real goal? Nicole, I want you to stay by my side. He moved closer, crouching down to be at eye level with me. I want you to look at me the way you used to. I want you to love me the way you did before. To be with me forever. If you want to keep the baby, I won't mind. As long as you stay with me. I looked at Patrick in front of me. Gone was the arrogance and pride. At that moment, he seemed as pitiful as a child begging for candy. But my heart didn't stir. Not even a little. Patrick. I lowered my eyes to look at him. The Nicole who loved you, who wanted to follow you forever, she died in that foreign country 4 months ago. We can start over. Nicole. I swear I'll treat you well, but I don't like you anymore. Patrick. There's not a single bit of affection for you left in my heart. You know me better than anyone. If I don't like someone, I won't even spare them a glance. The color drained from his face, but he still wouldn't give up. If you don't like me, then who do you like? That man who abandoned you and the baby? Nicole, do you have any idea how hard it will be for a single woman to raise a child with an unknown father? Hard? I'm not afraid of death. So why would I fear hardship or struggle? So you still hate me for abandoning you, right? What will it take for you to forgive me? He held onto my hand, unwilling to let go, growing more and more agitated. I didn't want to argue with him in a hospital, so I casually replied, then have Roma go through the same suffering I did. If I can make that happen, will you come back? I pushed him away, stood up, and tightened my coat as I walked out. We'll see. As if Patrick would ever let Roma go through hell too. So, after saying that, I didn't give it a second thought. After all these years of knowing him, every time I clashed with Roma, I never won. Patrick always favored her, and this time would probably be the same. But I no longer felt sad or hurt by things like this. Chapter 19. I received Mr. Fu's call at dusk. A week later, I was out for a walk in the plaza just outside the neighborhood. There was a small fountain there, and a flock of pigeons had flown in from somewhere. As Oliver's deep voice came through, the pigeons took flight. The sound of their wings filled the air, while the clouds in the evening sky were painted in brilliant hues by the fading sunlight. I sat down on a bench, feeling a strange sense of peace and calm settle in my heart. Miss Bai, there's something I may need your help with. Mr. Fu, please go ahead. Next month, I have to leave for a while. There's something I need to handle personally. Oliver's voice was as steady as ever. Unhurried. If I return safely, I'll keep my promise not to interfere with your and the child's lives. But if I don't make it back, the child you're carrying will be my only bloodline left in this world. So, Miss Bai, would you be willing to stay with the Fu family and raise the child? It felt as though someone had suddenly gripped my heart tightly. Just as I thought I couldn't breathe, I found myself asking, Mr. Fu, is this something dangerous? Don't worry. It's just a personal matter. It won't affect you or the child. And I'm only asking your opinion. If you're unwilling, Nicole, I still won't force you. Mr. Fu, I have a hospital appointment tomorrow for a checkup. On the other end of the line, there was a brief 2-second pause. All right. Sorry for disturbing you. So, Mr. Fu, I won't be able to leave until the day after tomorrow. Could you have your people come to pick me up that day? I heard a faint crackling sound on the line. In that sound, it seemed like Oliver's breathing wasn't as steady as before. I placed my hand on my slightly rounded belly, and for some reason, my lips curved into a small smile. Would 10 a.m. the day after tomorrow be okay? Yes. Then it's settled. Nicole. All right. Mr. Fu. It's settled. Chapter 20. When the call ended, it was 2 a.m. on his side. The cold, harsh wind carried a strong scent of blood. It pulled him back to reality, away from that rare moment of tenderness. Oliver put away his phone. The gentle expression he had during the call had long vanished. He walked down the steps slowly, unhurried. He stopped in front of the man who was kneeling, trembling like a leaf. In the man's line of sight was a pair of gleaming leather shoes. But those expensive, eye-catching shoes were now splattered with blood. Terrified, the man began to tremble even more, lowering his body to the ground, banging his head, begging for mercy. Mr. Fu, please. Mr. Fu, spare me this once. I won't do it again. His chin was suddenly lifted by the toe of Oliver's shoe. The man, pale as a ghost, shakily raised his eyes. Under the cold moonlight, Oliver's eyes were even colder than the night itself. I've said it before. Those who follow me, there are things you should never touch. No one is allowed to. Mr. Fu, Luis. Not only did you touch them, but your men also injured 3 police officers. Mr. Fu, I beg you. I'll never do it again. I swear. I'll cut off my arm to show my sincerity. It's too late. Martin, take him to the police station. Mr. Fu. The man panicked, knowing that going to the police meant certain death. Think about your wife and kids. The man fell silent instantly. Oliver walked out of the courtyard, and someone handed him a warm towel. He carefully wiped his hands, and as he bent down to get into the car, his voice was still calm. Clean up this place. She's coming the day after tomorrow, and I don't want to scare her. Chapter 21. Oliver's estate was vast. Multiple gardens, each with its own unique charm, changing with the seasons. Though it was winter, the gardens were still in full bloom. The white buildings were arranged in an elegant, staggered layout, and he took me to the main house, still located in Building 1. The master suite that occupied the entire second floor was still set up just like that night. The moment I walked through the door, my face flushed slightly. Oliver took my suitcase and dismissed the servants. Take a rest and then freshen up. I'll unpack. Mr. Fu, I can do it myself. You're pregnant. You've been through enough. Oliver gently took my hand and led me to the sofa to sit down. I watched as he opened the suitcase and began to organize my things. Outer clothes and other items were easy enough, but when he started sorting through my intimate apparel, I couldn't just sit there anymore. Mr. Fu, I stood up, moving more nimbly than I had in months of pregnancy. I snatched my underwear from his large hands. Maybe my face was too red, because Oliver didn't insist further. I quickly sorted out my undergarments. I didn't even notice that Oliver's clothes were also in that drawer. When I went to the bathroom to freshen up, I didn't realize that Oliver stood in the huge walk-in closet for a long time. Then, looking at the colorful clothes among the usual black, white, and gray, his eyes slowly filled with a quiet, contented smile. Chapter 22. I knew very little about Oliver. From what I could tell, he seemed to come from a very good background, and he seemed to be an upright businessman with a lot of success. So at first, I didn't take the things he said on the phone too seriously. That was until I overheard something from Martin. This time, Oliver was headed to the southern region, and the people he had to deal with were the most dangerous and ruthless type. Those people crossed the line with something they never should have touched. Against Mr. Fu. Now, the boss has to clean up the mess, and it's going to be extremely tricky and dangerous to get out cleanly. But Miss Bai, you're truly our boss's lucky star. You have the boss's child in your belly, and that's an incredible thing. If something really goes wrong, at least the boss will have a child to carry on his bloodline. As Martin spoke, he started tearing up. Seeing him cry made me feel sad as well, and before I knew it, tears started streaming down my face too. Oliver happened to come back at that moment. Seeing that Martin had made me cry, he rarely showed anger. Don't scold him. I tugged at Oliver's sleeve, looking at him with red eyes. Mr. Fu, stay with me and the baby tonight. In the first few days after arriving here, I slept alone in the master bedroom on the second floor. Oliver stayed in the guest room. We had only met a few times, though we had shared a bed, and I was now carrying his child. But in truth, we barely knew each other. So, when Oliver appeared in his robe and pulled me into his arms, my body stiffened slightly, but he merely brushed the hair off my forehead and kissed me gently between my brows. He didn't do anything else to make me uncomfortable. In the darkness, I took his hand and placed it on my belly. Mr. Fu, feel the baby. His breathing slowed for a moment. It took a while before he resumed his normal rhythm. His hand, warm and dry, gently stroked my slightly swollen belly, and soon I began to feel drowsy. Nicole. Just as I was about to fall asleep, Oliver suddenly kissed the corner of my lips. I'm sorry, Nicole. I was too tired at the time to ask why he said that. And later, before he left, I forgot to ask. It wasn't until much, much later, when our child was about to start primary school, that he finally confessed the truth to me one drunken night. In this world, there aren't as many coincidences or accidents as we might think. It was all carefully orchestrated by someone, paving every step of the way for the person they loved. Chapter 23. The night before Oliver left for the southern region, he still stayed in the master bedroom. By then, I was almost 5 months pregnant, perhaps because I felt relaxed and had been taking good care of myself. The damage to my body from before had mostly healed. I had gained weight in my face and body, finally looking a bit like a pregnant woman. In these past few days, I could sense Oliver's inner struggle. After all, he was in the prime of his life, strong and healthy, and even though I was pregnant, my figure hadn't changed much. In fact, with the care I was receiving, my skin was glowing, and my complexion was excellent. I had been sleeping a lot during my pregnancy, but sometimes I would vaguely hear Oliver getting up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom and run the water. So that night, when he kissed me and said good night as usual, I kissed him back and hugged him. No one knew, but I often had this recurring dream. It wasn't about the hardship and suffering I had endured in those months. Instead, it always took me back to the moment we first met. I was struggling desperately, screaming in Mandarin for help. He was the only East Asian face in the entire room, surrounded by a crowd of people. I didn't really have any hope. A drowning person rarely finds salvation. But he stopped, turned around, and looked at me in my disheveled state. Then, he said something to the people beside him. Quickly, the ones holding on to me let go in fear. I clutched my torn clothes, trying desperately to cover myself, when suddenly, a thick men's coat was draped over my shoulders, enveloping me completely. Then, he extended his hand toward me, a long, strong hand with a sandalwood bracelet around his wrist. At that moment, I thought I had encountered a merciful God. Chapter 24. Nicole. Don't tempt me. Oliver caught my hand. Why not? Oliver chuckled softly, a helpless smile on his face as he kissed my fingertips. You know why. It's been almost 5 months. The doctor said it's okay. I gathered my courage, despite the blush rising in my cheeks, and looked into his eyes. Or, do you not want to? Are you unwilling? I'm afraid of hurting you and the baby. His hand gently rested on my slightly rounded belly, and he sighed. Go to sleep. Be good. In the end, I averted my gaze, my flushed face pressing against his chest. Mr. Fu, the doctor said, as long as it's not too intense. It's fine. After I said that, he didn't reply, but I could feel the muscles of his arm, which was wrapped around me, slowly tensing like stone. I bit my lip and rolled over in his embrace. I searched online. Like this, we won't put any pressure on my belly. Nicole. Hot kisses trailed across the back of my neck and shoulders. Oliver's voice was hoarse. Who taught you how to seduce a man like this? There's plenty of information online. He lowered his head and whispered near my ear. Tell me if you feel uncomfortable. And if I tell you, will you stop? I don't know where I found the boldness to say that. I also didn't realize that I had a mischievous streak hidden deep inside, but as soon as the words left my mouth, I curled up like a frightened bird, regretting it immediately. Oliver hugged me tightly from behind. His voice was rough in my ear. No, but Nicole. I'll be gentler. Oh no, he probably didn't know this, but long ago, I had already fallen hopelessly in love with his gentleness. Chapter 25. 2 weeks after Oliver left, I went out for a walk. Unexpectedly, I ran into Roma. When she saw me, she was completely different from her usual proud self. She grabbed my hand and begged me to help her, to send her back home. Only then did I realize that what Patrick had promised me at the hospital wasn't just empty words. But Roma had a relative here who held some influence. Hadn't they protected her? Later, Martin told me that Roma's cousin, Luis, had been sentenced to death. Nicole, I'm begging you. Roma knelt on the ground, clinging to my legs, pleading once again. I looked down at her. Luis had been imprisoned, and how could Roma's life be any better now? Patrick had abandoned her in a foreign land, just as I had once been left. But unlike me, She didn't have the good fortune to meet someone like Mr. Fu. Martin wanted to drive her away, but I placed a hand on my rounded belly. In my heart, I thought, Roma might be bad, but she didn't deserve to die. Back when I had made that request to Patrick, I had acted out of impulse. But if anyone deserved blame, it was Patrick, the person who truly deserved resentment. For the sake of the child in my belly, and for his father, I decided to show some mercy. Even though Oliver had lied to me about certain things, I still only wanted him to come back safely. Besides, I didn't want to be a rich, young widow. Martin, call her family. I glanced at Roma. She must have been terribly frightened. Her mental state was clearly unstable. She's getting off too easy. I smiled. It's not that easy. I motioned Martin over and whispered something to him. A few days later, Roma's family back home received word about her. 10 million yuan, and their daughter could return safely. At the same time, the Lin family learned that it was Patrick who had abandoned Roma abroad. This caused a huge scandal between the Lin and Zhao families, leaving Patrick overwhelmed and struggling to cope. After Roma returned, the Lin family forced Patrick to marry her, using her ruined reputation as leverage. It was said that from the day of the wedding, the two were already in constant conflict, and Patrick had even laid hands on Roma. Naturally, the Lin family wouldn't let it slide, and both sides became embroiled in an endless feud. After the marriage, the two of them lived in constant turmoil. The unforgettable first love Patrick had once held so high, his untouchable goddess, she had become the person he hated most. Patrick started drinking heavily, and whenever he came home drunk, he and Roma would argue. It became routine for him to hit her, but all of this, of course, was something for later, and none of it had anything to do with me. Oh, by the way, that 10 million? I donated all of it to children's charities and orphanages. Chapter 26. When Oliver left, he said he would definitely return before I gave birth. But as the final week approached, there was still no sign of him. The last message I received from him was 7 days ago. The atmosphere in the house had grown increasingly tense. Even I overheard some unsettling conversations. After thinking it over, I called Martin. One by one, we thoroughly investigated all the servants in the house. Those who were restless or seemed to have divided loyalties were sent far away. Then I ordered the doors closed. No one was allowed in or out. On the third day before my due date, there was still no word from Oliver. Martin could no longer sit still and insisted on going to the southern country. I was on the brink of collapse, nearing labor yet growing thinner by the day. Martin, go, no matter what, whether he's dead or alive. I need an answer. But Martin had been left behind by Oliver, who had firmly insisted on it. He was ready to enter dangerous territory, but his greatest worry was still me. He left his most trusted subordinates to stay behind at the house. But Miss Bai, Martin hesitated, torn between his duties. Otherwise, let me send you back to the mainland first. It's no longer safe here. Naturally, Oliver was his top priority, but I was carrying Oliver's child. Moreover, since Oliver had been out of contact for so long, his enemies were all lying in wait, ready to strike. Just the other day, Martin and his men had caught several strangers outside the estate, armed with guns. Martin, I'm not going back. The baby and I will stay here and wait for him. Miss Bai, go ahead. I can manage on my own. I smiled at him, just as I had when I faced Patrick. I extended my hand to him. See, Nicole can't be broken. She can endure any hardship, and she's not afraid. Martin looked at my hands, which hadn't fully recovered despite months of care. Tears began to fall uncontrollably. I'm not leaving. I'll listen to the boss. I'll protect you and his child. I wanted to convince him to leave, to go find Oliver. Maybe all it took was his presence to turn the tide in Oliver's favor. But before I could speak, a sudden, sharp pain hit my abdomen. The intense contractions left me speechless. As I felt myself slipping into unconsciousness from the pain, only one thought remained. I wouldn't hold out until Oliver returned. I wouldn't make it to have him by my side for the birth. When he left, he asked me if I was scared. I told him I wasn't afraid of anything, but in truth, I'm really terrified of pain. suffering, being beaten, scolded, hungry, and cold, and I'm terrified of that surgical cut when giving birth. So, Oliver, if only you were here, if you were here, how much better it would be. Chapter 27. Martin and the servants took me to the hospital. Just as I was being wheeled into the delivery room, the nurse hadn't yet had a chance to close the door. A strong hand suddenly pushed the door open with force. Nicole. As I lay unconscious on the delivery bed, I vaguely heard Oliver's voice. I tried my best to open my eyes, to see if it was really him who had returned, but I had no strength left. Still, my hand was held tightly by a large, warm hand. That familiar warmth and strength immediately put me at ease. Nicole. Oliver bent down and gently kissed me. I'm back. Nicole. The delivery went smoothly. The doctor said my body's condition was excellent, meeting all the criteria for a natural birth. And with a natural birth, the pain subsides quickly afterward. No need to endure the days of pain that come after a C-section. But Oliver was clearly terrified. In fact, midway through the delivery, he became so anxious that he was disrupting the doctors, so they had to escort him out. While I was crying in the delivery room, Oliver was standing outside, shedding tears as well. Martin was so shocked when he saw this that he was dumbfounded. Oliver sternly ordered him not to tell anyone. But the moment I left the delivery room, Martin secretly told me everything. When I imagined that scene, I couldn't help but laugh. But as I laughed, tears began to fall. No matter how much someone can endure hardship, or is willing to endure it, who doesn't want to be cherished and held in someone's heart? Shortly after I gave birth, Oliver scheduled his surgery. Mrs. Fu, the family matriarch, was still somewhat reluctant, but with her great-grandson in her arms, she was satisfied and didn't say much more. When Oliver came back this time, he was wounded. He had lost contact during that period because his injuries were too severe. I didn't say anything about it, but when the baby turned 3 months old and my body had fully recovered, I asked Oliver to accompany me to a temple. He wasn't a believer, but I was. I simply prayed that the Bodhisattva, seeing my sincere heart, would protect him too. As I knelt in front of the Buddha, holding incense, Oliver suddenly said to me, Nicole, you have no idea how much guilt I carry. He had deliberately switched the medicine, and the explosion that caused the hospital's power outage was done on his orders. Later, he lured her away from China and to his side with sweet lies. He didn't believe in Buddha. He wasn't afraid of divine punishment. He was only afraid that she would fear him, distance herself from him. He was afraid that his greed for her would never be forgiven. I glanced at him and handed him the incense. And you have no idea how compassionate and miraculous the Bodhisattva is here. Oliver took the incense and watched as I knelt devoutly. In the end, he mimicked my actions and knelt beside me. I raised my head piously, gazing at the Buddha, but Oliver kept glancing at me. Long ago, neither of us knew. That one glance, that single turn back then, had already destined us to be bound for a lifetime.